The man standing at the Family Feud podium introduced himself as John Smith, an accountant from Ohio. Average guy, average family. Nothing special, but Steve Harvey noticed something. The way John carried himself, the way he answered questions about wealth with unsettling precision, the way he seemed uncomfortable when the camera got too close, and then came the question that would expose everything. Name something rich people worry about. John's answer was so specific, so intimate, so impossibly accurate, that Steve stopped mid-game and said, "Hold on, who are you really?" What happened next would reveal that John Smith was actually John Castellano, tech billionaire, founder of a software empire worth $2.8 billion, according to Forbes. He'd been playing undercover, using a fake name, pretending to be ordinary for one single day. Because billionaires, he would later tell Steve, don't get to feel human anymore. They don't get to just be contestants on a game show. They're always the story, never just part of the story. Subscribe right now, because when Steve Harvey discovers who this man really is, the conversation that follows will change how you think about success forever. Let me take you back to how a billionaire ended up on a game show stage pretending to be nobody special, and what happened when the mask finally came off. 6 months before appearing on Family Feud, John Castellano sat in his penthouse office, overlooking Manhattan, and realized something that terrified him. He couldn't remember the last time someone had just talked to him like a normal person. Every conversation was calculated. Business associates wanted deals. Investors wanted money. Journalists wanted stories. Even his own extended family treated him differently after he sold his company for $3.2 billion 5 years ago. He wasn't John anymore. He was the billionaire. He was a walking ATM, a networking opportunity, a photo op. He was 52 years old, had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, and he was profoundly, devastatingly lonely. One evening, while channel surfing, John landed on Family Feud. He watched regular families compete, laugh, celebrate over $20,000 like it was life-changing money. He watched Steve Harvey joke with contestants who weren't trying to impress him or pitch him business ideas. They were just people, being people. John made a decision that his lawyers would later call insane, and his therapist would call necessary. He would go on Family Feud, undercover. As a normal person, he couldn't use his real name Tirj. John Castellano was too recognizable, at least in business circles, so he became John Smith. Generic, forgettable, perfect. He listed his occupation as accountant because it was boring enough that nobody would ask follow-up questions. He recruited his sister, her husband, and 2 cousins' family members who knew him before the billions, who still called him Johnny, who agreed to play along with the ruse. The application process took months. Full video submissions, background checks, interviews. John played the part perfectly. This humble accountant from Columbus, Ohio, excited for a chance to compete with his family. No private jets mentioned, no mansion, no empire, just John Smith, regular guy. When the acceptance letter came, John felt something he hadn't felt in years, pure, uncomplicated excitement. Not because of business, not because of money, because for one afternoon he'd get to be anonymous. The Family Feud studio was smaller than John expected, more intimate. The energy was electric. Families cheering, audience members waving signs, Steve Harvey working the crowd with effortless charisma. The Smith family, that's what they were calling themselves, stood at their podium opposite the Rodriguez family from Texas. John's hands were sweating, not from nerves about the game, but from fear of being recognized. He'd made sure to dress down, khaki pants from Target, a basic polo shirt, a cheap watch to replace the Patek Philippe he usually wore. He'd even taken an Uber to the studio instead of his usual car service. Steve Harvey started with introductions, working his way down the Smith family line. "And you must be the captain," Steve said, extending his hand to John. "What's your name, brother?" "John Smith," John said, keeping his voice steady. "John Smith? That's the most American name I've ever heard." Steve laughed. The audience laughed with him. "What do you do for a living, John?" "I'm an accountant. Work with numbers all day." "Exciting stuff," Steve joked. The audience chuckled. John smiled. "Perfect. Boring. Forgettable." The game progressed normally for the first 2 rounds. The Smith family was decent, not great, not terrible. John intentionally held back, letting his sister and cousins take the spotlight. He didn't want to draw attention. But during the 3rd round, something happened that would unravel everything. Steve asked the question. "We asked 100 people, name something rich people worry about." It was John's turn. He stepped up to the podium, his family behind him waiting to hear his answer. The question hit different than Steve intended. This wasn't theoretical for John. This was his daily reality. Without thinking, Without considering how it would sound, John answered from his truth. Whether people like them for who they are or what they have. The audience went quiet for a moment. Then the board flipped. Number 2 answer, 37 points. Steve's eyebrows raised. That's a very specific answer, John. You sound like you know something about being wealthy. John felt ice in his veins. He'd slipped. He'd answered as himself, not as John Smith, the accountant. Just a guess, Steve, John said quickly. But Steve Harvey was watching him now. Really watching him, and Steve had been in entertainment long enough to know when something didn't add up. The game continued, but Steve kept glancing at John. During commercial breaks, Steve noticed things. The way John carried himself, confident, almost regal. The way his cheap watch caught the light wrong, too heavy, too refined. The way John's sister slipped, and almost called him Johnny C before catching herself. Then came fast money. John's cousin went first, scoring 178 points. John needed just 22 points to win the $20,000. 5 questions. Easy. Name something rich people lose sleep over, Steve said. John didn't hesitate, wondering if anyone would still love them if they lost everything. The answer came from somewhere deep. Somewhere true. Somewhere that John Smith, the accountant, shouldn't have access to. 23 points. The family won. Everyone celebrated. Confetti fell. The audience cheered, but Steve Harvey stood there staring at John Smith with narrowed eyes. Something wasn't right. After the taping ended, Steve pulled one of his producers aside. That John Smith guy, something's off. Google him. The producer pulled out her phone, typing quickly. John Smith, accountant, Ohio. There's thousands of results, Steve. Generic name. Try image search. Use his face. The producer took a photo from the recording, ran it through reverse image search. What came back made her gasp. Steve, you need to see this. The phone screen showed a Forbes article from 3 months ago. Tech billionaire John Castellano sells AI division for $800 million. Below it, a photo, same face, same person. But instead of a polo shirt, he wore a $5,000 suit. Instead of a game show podium, he stood in front of a Tech Core Systems logo. Net worth $2.8 billion, the producer read aloud. Founder and CEO of Tech Core Systems, one of the 100 wealthiest people in America. Steve stared at the image. He played us. A billionaire played Family Feud Undercover. What do we do? Steve thought for a moment. Find him before he leaves. I need to talk to this man. 20 minutes later, Steve found John in the parking garage, about to get into an Uber. His family had already left. He was alone, finally able to drop the act. John Castellano. John froze. He turned slowly. Steve Harvey stood there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. How long did you know? John asked quietly. Since you answered that question, about rich people too perfectly, confirmed it about 10 minutes ago. Steve walked closer. Why'd you do it? You're worth billions. Why come on my show pretending to be an accountant? John was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised Steve. He started crying. When's the last time someone just talked to you? John asked. Really talked to you? Not because you're Steve Harvey, the celebrity, not because they want something from you, not because they're intimidated or excited or trying to take a selfie, just talk to you like you're just some guy. Steve's expression softened slightly. It's been a while. For me, it's been 5 years, John said. 5 years since my company went public and I became a billionaire. 5 years since every conversation became a transaction. 5 years since anyone saw me as just John. He wiped his eyes. I came on your show because for 2 hours, I wanted to feel normal again. I wanted someone to look at me and see a boring accountant, not a walking ATM. I wanted to answer questions and win $20,000 and have it actually feel like an accomplishment instead of pocket change. Steve was quiet. He understood more than John knew. Did it work? Steve asked. Did you feel normal? John smiled sadly. For about 90 minutes, until I answered that question about rich people too honestly. Money does that. It makes you forget how to lie about what it costs. What does it cost? Everything, John said simply. It costs friendships because you never know who likes you and who likes your bank account. It costs family because everyone wants loans. They'll never pay back. It costs privacy because you're always in Forbes or Bloomberg. And it costs, his voice broke. It costs being able to walk onto a game show and just be a contestant, just be human. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Steve made a decision. Come back inside. I want to talk to you on camera. Steve, I can't. If this gets out, this needs to get out, Steve interrupted. Do you know how many people think money solves everything? Do you know how many people see billionaires and think you've got it all figured out? You need to tell your story, the real one. John hesitated, then nodded. They went back into the studio. The crew was confused but set up quickly. Just two chairs, two microphones, Steve and John facing each other. "Why'd you really come here?" Steve asked once the cameras were rolling. John took a breath. "I came here because I'm lonely, Steve. Profoundly lonely. I have $2.8 billion. I have houses, cars, jets, everything money can buy, but I don't have friends. Not real ones. I have business associates. I have employees. I have people who want things from me, but I don't have anyone who just wants to grab coffee and talk about nothing." "Why not?" "Because rich people exist in a different universe than everyone else. We go to different places, eat at different restaurants, send our kids to different schools, and when we do interact with regular people, they treat us differently. They're either intimidated or resentful or trying to get something. Nobody just relates." Steve leaned forward. "So you put on a fake name and came on my show." "I wanted to feel what normal people feel, excitement over winning $20,000, pride in competing with family, the simple joy of being good at a game show. For 2 hours, I wasn't John Castellano the billionaire. I was John Smith, the accountant, and it was the most human I've felt in years." "But then you answered that question," Steve said, "about rich people worrying if anyone would love them without their money. That came from somewhere real." John's eyes filled with tears again. "My wife left me 3 years ago. We'd been married 18 years. She said she couldn't tell anymore if she loved me or loved the lifestyle. She said the money had changed both of us so much that she didn't know who we were anymore. She took a settlement and left. I haven't dated since because every woman I meet, I wonder, would you be here if I was John Smith, the accountant? And I never know the answer." The studio was completely silent. "The question you asked, name something rich people worry about. The answer should have been nothing. That's what everyone thinks. Rich people have it made. What could they possibly worry about? But the truth? We worry about the same things everyone worries about. Love, connection, meaning, purpose. We just worry about them while sitting in mansions." Steve wiped his eyes. "Money doesn't buy happiness. Money buys comfort," John corrected. "It buys security. It buys options. But it doesn't buy the thing humans need most: to be seen, to be known, to be valued for who you are, not what you have." "Can I tell you something?" Steve said. "When I first made money, real money, I went through the same thing. People changed around me. Friends I'd known for years suddenly needed loans. Family members expected me to pay for everything. Women were interested who'd never looked at me twice before." John nodded. "How'd you handle it?" "I had to relearn who I was," Steve said. "I had to understand that Steve Harvey the person and Steve Harvey the celebrity were different things. And I had to find people who knew me before. People who remembered when I was broke. People who tell me the truth, even if it made me uncomfortable." "I don't have those people anymore," John said quietly. "The money changed every relationship. Everyone who knew me before either wants something now or resents that I have more than them." "So you're alone?" "So I'm alone," John confirmed. "In a penthouse apartment that costs $15 million, surrounded by everything money can buy, completely and utterly alone." Steve was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that would become the most important part of this entire episode. "John, I want you to do something for me. I want you to look into that camera and talk to everyone watching who thinks money will solve their problems. Tell them what billionaires know but never say." John looked at the camera, took a breath, and told the truth. "If you're watching this and you're struggling financially, I'm not going to lie and say money doesn't help. It does. Not worrying about rent or medical bills or feeding your kids. That's huge. That's life-changing. But if you think money will make you happy, you're wrong. If you think wealth will solve your relationship problems or make people respect you or fill the empty places inside you, you're wrong." His voice grew stronger. "I have $2.8 billion. I can buy anything except what matters most. I can't buy genuine friendship. I can't buy authentic love. I can't buy the feeling of being truly known by another human being. I can't buy the simple joy of being ordinary. And that's what I wanted today. Just for 2 hours. I wanted to be John Smith, boring accountant, competing on a game show with my family. I wanted someone to look at me and not see dollar signs." "Did it work?" Steve asked softly. "Until I forgot to pretend," John said with a sad smile. "Until I answered as myself instead of as John Smith. That's the thing about money, it changes you so much that you can't even pretend to be normal anymore. It becomes part of who you are, whether you want it to or not." The episode aired 6 weeks later. The producers debated heavily about whether to include the backstage interview with John. Legal got involved. John's lawyers tried to block it, but ultimately John himself made the call: air it all. If my humiliation can help someone understand that money isn't the answer, then it's worth it, he said. The episode became the most watched Family Feud in history. Over 22 million people watched John Smith get exposed as a billionaire. Over 22 million people heard him talk about loneliness and authenticity and the cost of wealth. But more importantly, the episode started a conversation. Business publications wrote think pieces about billionaire loneliness. Mental health advocates talked about how wealth doesn't protect against isolation. Financial advisors started discussing with clients the non-monetary costs of pursuing wealth. John Castellano received over 10,000 messages in the weeks following the episode. Some were hateful, "Cry me a river, rich boy." But many were surprisingly understanding. "I always thought money would solve my problems. Now I realize it just changes what you're solving for." 3 months after the episode, John made an announcement. He was giving away 90% of his wealth, not all at once, strategically, over the next decade, but he was divesting, downsizing, returning to something closer to normal. "I'm keeping enough to be comfortable," he explained in a press conference. "But I don't need billions. Nobody needs billions. What I need is connection. What I need is to be able to walk into a room and not have everyone's behavior change. What I need is to feel human again." He moved out of his Manhattan penthouse into a modest house in Columbus, Ohio, the same city where John Smith claimed to be from. He started volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic computer skills to seniors. He joined a neighborhood book club where nobody knew or cared who he used to be. And slowly, very slowly, John Castellano started feeling like a person again. Steve Harvey kept a copy of that interview in his dressing room. He'd watch it sometimes before shows, reminding himself of what they'd captured, a moment of radical honesty from someone the world assumed had nothing to complain about. "That day taught me something," Steve said in an interview 6 months later. "I thought I understood wealth because I have money. But I'm not billionaire wealthy. I'm not change your identity to feel normal wealthy. John showed me that there's a level of wealth where you stop being a person and become a symbol, and symbols are lonely." The conversation sparked a movement among ultra-wealthy individuals. Several billionaires came forward with similar stories: the isolation, the inability to trust, the sense that every relationship is transactional. Some started foundations focused on helping wealthy individuals navigate the psychological challenges of extreme wealth. "It sounds absurd," one therapist who works exclusively with ultra-high net worth individuals said. "Rich people problems, but they're real. When you have enough money that you never have to work again, never have to worry about survival, you start confronting bigger questions. Who am I? What matters? Why am I here?" And those questions are terrifying when you realize money can't answer them. John Castellano became an unlikely advocate for wealth, redistribution, and economic equality. Not out of guilt, but out of understanding. "I lived at the top of the pyramid," he tells audiences now. "And from up there I can tell you, the view isn't worth the climb. I had everything society says you should want, and I was miserable. Because what humans actually need, connection, purpose, authenticity, those things get harder, not easier, with extreme wealth." John Castellano is 54 now. He lives in Columbus, Ohio, in a house worth $400,000, a mansion by most standards but modest for a former billionaire. He's down to his last $280 million, having given away or invested the rest in philanthropic causes, focused on economic opportunity and mental health. He's dating someone he met at his book club. She's a librarian. She knew him for 6 months before learning about his past wealth. "I just thought John was a retired tech guy," she laughs, which I guess technically he is. John goes to Family Feud tapings occasionally, sitting in the audience now cheering for contestants competing for $20,000, like it matters, because it does matter. To them, "I learned something that day on Steve's stage," John says. "I learned that the thing I was chasing, normalcy, authenticity, human connection, it wasn't something I could fake. I couldn't put on a costume and pretend to be John Smith for 2 hours and think that would fix my loneliness. I had to actually become someone who could connect. I had to give up the barriers that wealth builds." Steve Harvey still tells the story, not to mock John, but to remind people that success and happiness aren't the same thing. "That day, a billionaire came on my show pretending to be an accountant because he was so desperate to feel normal that he created a fake identity. That's not a story about deception. That's a story about loneliness, about what happens when you get everything society says you should want and realize it's not enough." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Because this isn't just about a billionaire on a game show. This isn't just about wealth and loneliness. This is about what we're all chasing. We think money will solve our problems. We think wealth equals happiness. We think if we just had more salary, more savings, more security, then we'd finally feel content. But John Castellano had $2.8 billion and felt so isolated that he created a fake identity just to experience 2 hours of normalcy. He had everything money could buy and nothing money couldn't. The things that actually matter, love, friendship, connection, purpose, meaning, those things don't scale with wealth. Sometimes they scale inversely. The richer you get, the harder they become to find. So before you spend your life chasing billions, ask yourself what you're really after. If it's security, fine. If it's comfort, reasonable. But if it's happiness, if it's fulfillment, if it's the feeling of being truly known by another human being, money won't get you there. John Castellano learned that lesson at the cost of billions and years of isolation. He stood on a game show stage, pretended to be nobody special, and discovered that being nobody special is actually what he wanted all along. Not to be invisible, but to be seen for who he is, not what he has. That's not a rich person problem. That's a human problem, and it's the one thing all the money in the world can't solve.